This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Chelsea Plummer with the Kansas Farm Management Association kicks off today's show with part of their podcast where they talked with K-State's Jenny Ifft and Delide Joseph about their research on conservation practices and farm profitability. Keeping the show rolling is Luke Byers, John West, and Darren Hofmann as they converse about the Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference and who they are excited to hear present. K-State Horticulture Extension Specialist Cynthia Domenghini ends today's show discussing vermicomposting, a method of composting that uses worms to break down food scraps and other organic materials. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show with part of Kansas Farm Management Association's podcast that's hosted by Chelsea Plummer. And today she's joined by K-State's Jenny Ifft and Delide Joseph.
Today, we're going to be covering some results from a study that Dr. Ifft conducted over the past year on regenerative kind of conservation practices. I know we've talked about how some words kind of trigger people. And so I guess first, if you just want to share a little bit about what this study was and why you guys decided to undertake this study.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for having me today. And this is a great question because we know regenerative agriculture, like in the last few years, have been talked about a lot in the agriculture sector. So we decided to look into it deeper to see what's going on and how we can gain some insight and to provide farmers into regenerative agriculture. So I'm happy today to talk about what we found in the study and how that can help farmers make better decisions.
Great.
There's all kinds of information out there about, you could say conservation agriculture, regenerative agriculture. We're really focusing on investments in soil health in this study. But, we really just want to provide sort of a data-driven, unbiased approach to try to understand, what practices, conservation practices producers are using and what's the link to profitability. Because we know there's, a lot of, maybe extreme information for and against conservation practices. So we're really trying to understand what's going on and, what are the opportunities for producers.
When you guys say regenerative agriculture, what exactly are you guys kind of referring to?
Okay, that's actually a great question because we have many terms referred to regenerative agriculture because we have people say conservation practices. Sometimes they're using confront them together. We also have organic agriculture, climate smart agriculture. But with regenerative agriculture, mostly we kind of bring together all the conservation practices, not individually, but we're trying to create synergy between the not only you doing no-till or you doing cover crop, but doing all together so you can kind of interact with the ecosystem together so we can find the maximum benefit of regenerative ag. So definitely regenerative agriculture will be like a combination of practices that can help farmers to kind of improve their yield, but not only that, but the environment and the ultimate goal of every farmer, which would be a profitability for them.
I really like that you guys have tried to just tie this back to profitability. I think I remember looking through, and you may say this too, Jenny, but looking through some of your stuff where if something's not profitable, that's not going to be sustainable for a business. And so, yes, people are pushing all these regenerative ideas, conservation techniques, but if it causes problems for profitability for a farm, then it's not something that was going to be sustainable long term for them.
Right. And that sort of gets into the policy perspective, right? Because if these practices are profitable, there's questions what combinations of practices and duration. There's all kinds of questions about that. Yeah. But if they are profitable, you don't necessarily need the policies in place to sort of spur adoption, or to spur adoption in the long term. But if they're not necessarily profitable, then there's maybe a case for some type of policy if the say, environmental or public benefits are large enough.
As you guys have started digging into the answers and everything, what are some of the preliminary findings you guys have had?
What we find so far, we have a lot of people doing tillage practices no-till. So we have around more than 30% of the farmers that answer the survey say they have their field and continuous no-till. And also we have for a farmer also that have half no-till, meaning that they have no-till but only in half of their rotation, like their field are not completely on no-till. So we have around 30% of them also are on a fall-induced category.
And one thing I think for sort of the three main practices we looked at, no-till, cover crops, and rotation. We also asked about grazing and other things. But at a minimum, farms were, sort of at or above the national averages. Cover crops was really surprising. Mm-hmm. So at least 45% of all respondents had tried some cover crops, and the percentage for especially North Central was higher. And we were suspicious, but we presented it at our Risk and Profit conference. And we heard a lot of stories, saying people are really, experimenting with cover crops, seeing what's worked. In a lot of cases, they've been able to graze them, and that, especially in our current farm economy, had made a difference. So we were a little surprised, but we went to talk to people about it, and not surprised anymore.
So you did do some other groups as well to look at practices. You looked at practices by operator age as well as farm size. If you guys want to maybe share just a little bit about that.
Yeah, great. Before that, I mentioned that there is also like soil management practices in general. So when we asked the farmer like what were the most important for them, and their answer was like soil health was on top of the main management, which is a very important factor also in regenerative ag. For the conservation practices, like we look trying to see between different group of age also, and we noticed that we have more of the younger farmer are adopting a conservation practices. So, for example, for cover crop, we have 76% of the farmer that adopt cover crop are people on the 50, 44 years old. So that is very impressive, meaning that in the coming years we will have maybe more people into the regenerative ag if we find that it's profitable for them. And also, when we look into region, also we have in North Central, we have 60% people, a farmer with cover crop, and we have around 63 of them also their field are on continuous no-till also. And we didn't get a lot of farmers from the Northwest, but the farmer we have, they are 30% of them are using cover crop, and also we have around 23% of them also have their field on continuous no-till.
And I would add to that, it was, we're looking at everything by region. And so, you have your 5 regenerative principles. One of is including livestock, but there's a broader part of that is context. So, maybe if you're in Northeast Kansas, there's just less cattle out there. So grazing residues might be harder. Grazing cover crops might be harder. In other parts of the state, it can really fit in. I know some folks in Western Kansas perhaps aren't huge fans of cover crops. And so, with this whole context thing, your environment matters, profitability matters. You don't just do these things blindly. And so, that's part of regenerative agriculture. For us, we're just, making sure that when we do our analysis, we're looking at different regions. We're not saying you don't get the highest score if you do everything, or we're accounting for that in our analysis.
One of the big drivers was to see if any of these practices could link back to profitability, which is why it was really nice to be able to use. You guys used the KFMA data to link back to the farms that answered the survey, because we have all of that data with the profitability. And so I guess, did you guys find any type of relationship between practices and profitability for the KFMA farms?
But for now, it's kind of very, very difficult to say, okay, we find exactly this is the exact outcome from doing those practices, because it's kind of hard to measure which factor we're going to base and to kind of measure or to link this with profitability. So it's kind of very difficult. But we kind of go into tools of a basic, some summary, so to say, okay, based on the category of practices you have, what is the average, compared to the average of other farms that have a different type of practices, or other farms that are not doing any practices at all. So what we do is that we come up with kind of a score. We kind of try to kind of score the regenerative practices. So we kind of look into how many practices do you have, and not only how many practices you have. If you have crop rotation, is it 2 or 3 or 4 crop rotation? So we kind of build a intensity score, to say, okay, how intense is your regenerative farming? Are you high intensity, medium, or low intensity? So we were able to look into those intensity category to see, is there any huge difference from their profitability and on other farm. So the measure we look into net farm income ratio. So we didn't want to look into net farm income only because we will have like the smaller farm compared to the big farm, we're gonna have a huge gap in their net farm income. So we use the net farm income ratio, and also we use the operating expense ratio also, so we kind of find. So what we found there, they are very close. The differences are not huge as for now. What we find between farms that are doing regenerative agriculture but what we found is, look, if you are a farm, a high intensity on regenerative practices, so you have a expense ratio fairly the same compared to farms that have medium intensity, but the farm with low intensity, we will find that, okay, on average, like they have like the lowest operating expense ratio. And also they had also the highest net farm income ratio as for now. But we will have to look deeper into those relationships so we can kind of make like a useful conclusion about the data we have.
Yeah, and if we combined average 2018 to 22, there really no meaningful difference. If we looked at 22, we saw the low intensity was slightly more profitable. But, you know, as the one thing economists always worry about, do you adopt because you're more or less profitable, or are you more profitable because you're adopting? And so we have some tools we can use to sort of disentangle that. And from these, I think we're really going to have to, because let's say you have young producers who are adopting more of these practices, but they might be paying more cash rent. They're still getting started. So there's still things we need to disentangle there.
Once again, that was K-State's Jenny Ifft and Delide Joseph as they are talking about their research with Kansas Farm Management Association's Chelsea Plummer. I will link this full podcast episode in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Thursday show talking about the Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference with Board President of the Kansas Ag Research and Technologies Association, Darren Hofmann, the Vice President of that association, John West, and Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent in the River Valley District, Luke Byers. John, Darren, Luke, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Thank you, Shelby.
Darren, what is this Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference, or also often referred to as CATCon?
This will be the 26th year of the conference already. Kansas Ag Research and Technology Association, or we shortened it up 2 years ago with CATCon. We're doing it a little differently this year. In the past, it has always been a 2-day conference, and this year we're just going to do a single-day conference on March 7th. We're going to have it in Clay Center, Kansas this year at the Fairgrounds building. In the past, it's always been at a hotel, but really grateful for Luke Byers and the River Valley District for hosting us this year. And so really excited to have Luke with us and getting this conference re-energized and head in the right direction again.
Luke, with this conference on Friday, March 7th, how does it get kicked off at 8 a.m.?
We're going to start things off getting people who have signed up, registered, and with all the materials that they'll need for the day. And they'll be able to enjoy for the first hour or so a trade show with a great lineup of exhibitors that we're going to be having there who have not only been generous enough to contribute financially to the day's program, but also will provide some networking opportunities for all of the participants and farmers that'll be there.
And who is the first presentation going to be by that's titled Different Management Zones and Variable Rate Applications?
That will be presented by Dr. Deepak Joshi, hired back in May. And he has a background from South Dakota State University, doing a lot of research up there before having a short stint at Arkansas State. This is the first time we've had an extension specialist specifically geared towards precision agriculture. So I think he's going to have a lot of interesting and valuable information to share with our participants.
What is the next presentation and who is doing it?
We're going to be bringing in Dr. Darren Rudnick, who has been heading up the K-State TAPS program, the Testing Ag Performance Systems, which really gives kind of an easy window for a lot of producers around the state to implement some of their ideas in row crop production agriculture. And so he's been heading up that program. So he's going to be discussing that program and providing some opportunities to some of the attendees. And we're also going to be having a brief presentation by CARTA's very own Darren Hofmann, who's going to be talking about his own on-farm trials of Pivot Bio's proven nitrogen-fixing products.
Yeah, this will be my second year presenting data on doing research on the farm. That I know a lot of farmers in the area. You have a company say, hey, this is what our product does, and this is what you're going to get out of it. Well, most farmers are pretty skeptical of that. So CARD has always been really good about having some of the members take some of these products, test them, and bring it before the conference and say, hey, this is how it worked for me. This is how it didn't work. This is some issues I struggled with it. So it's always really great to get some of these products, and it's great for the membership to get to see that and receive that information.
And next on the agenda, Kansas State University's Tina Sullivan, and what's she talking about?
Yeah, so Dr. Sullivan, she has been with us also for about a year. She has filled the position that was vacated by Dr. Stu Duncan. She has experience with a lot of irrigation technology from her research days out at Utah State University. And she's going to be talking about some of the variable rate irrigation and sprinkler alternatives available to folks in the ag industry here in Kansas.
After Tina, we have a presentation involving drones.
So following Dr. Tina Sullivan will be Lucas Koch. And Lucas actually has two roles. So he works with the Heinlein Brothers Agri-Services out of Seneca, Kansas. And he's also the CEO of Kelly Hills Unmanned Systems. And Kelly Hills is actually very interesting. It was the first FAA-approved UAS or UAV test range. The range facilitates testing of various unmanned aerial systems or UAVs on multiple crops, aiming to enhance pilot safety and revolutionize aerial application in agriculture. Hopefully, weather permitting, Lucas will also have a very nice display of us as Heinlein Brothers and Kelly Hills. They are the first U.S. operators of the Pika Pelican. The Pika Pelican is actually a full-blown spray aircraft with a 30-foot wingspan. Weather permitting, hopefully Lucas can have the Pelican there on site, but also if there's salt, mist, different things on the road, that can obviously be pretty corrosive to some of the connections there between the fuselage and the wings. So there is obviously the chance that it might not be there, but could obviously have a really nice backdrop there with the Pelican on site.
And after a 12:30 lunch at 1:30, joined by K-State's Sarah Lancaster.
She's going to be doing us the honor of favoring us with a presentation on targeted herbicide application technologies in Kansas, looking from a kind of a holistic weed management approach, more so than just relying solely on particular modes of action and chemicals that might have been run through the mill one too many times, kind of providing a more diversified, holistic, technological approach to some of those weed management strategies.
And following her, we have people from Flickner Innovation Farm, Ryan and Ray Flickner, and what are they talking about?
The Flickner Innovation Farm is in collaboration with K-State's Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment, otherwise known as K-CARE, and they interact with a lot of our watershed specialists like Dr. Will Boyer and Dr. Ron Graber, among others, and they're going to be presenting on some of the results from their emerging weed management and irrigation technologies farm trials. And we're especially fortunate to have them because, as you know, and you've probably talked about this with Chip Redmond and some other folks, that we've had pretty snowy beginning to the 2025 year. And so their proprietary innovation farm meeting was actually canceled back on January 7th. So we were happy to be able to get them on board so that we could have them present on their previous year's on-farm research results at this conference.
And after we hear from Flickner's, we get to hear from Lucas Haig here at Kansas State University. But after him, learning some about the self-driving mode kits getting put onto John Deere tractors.
Yeah, so following Dr. Haig would be Brian Gansky with John Deere. And, whether folks know or not, Deere recently released a kind of a bolt-on camera kit for their 8R, 8RX, as well as their 9R and 9RX tractors, essentially making them fully autonomous. So really excited to learn more about that. And obviously there's, probably some confidential information as far as the Deere tech pipeline goes, but Brian has also promised to, not only talk about their autonomous camera kits, but also kind of give us a peek into Deere's tech pipeline, kind of what might be leading edge and maybe even bleeding edge of what's to come here in the coming years.
And the day wraps up with the keynote speaker, Dr. Wes Lowe.
Following Brian Gansky, we're incredibly privileged and excited to have Dr. Wes Lowe from Mississippi State University. I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Lowe at the Oklahoma State Winter Crop School in December of 23, presenting on, similar data. Obviously, there's, been nearly another year and a half's worth of work going on there at Mississippi State and Dr. Lowe, but what he'll mainly be talking about is high-speed planter data. So he's got a lot of data regarding primarily soybeans and using the use of high-speed planters, whether singulation, stand establishment, different things like that. Obviously, as a lot of our farmers are getting larger and needing to cover more ground at a more timely. So, I think some of that data will be very, very useful for a lot of the growers in attendance. And on top of that, Dr. Lowe has worked in conjunction with Cotton Incorporated, so mainly in cotton, but on for lack of a better term, a see and till cultivator. And so essentially what they've done is put on a camera system as well as, hydraulic actuation of, shanks and shovels to essentially, there's not necessarily till all the time, but to say, there's a weed, actuate that shank or shovel to go into the ground and till out that weed and then essentially go back up above the ground so it's not tilling. The major reasoning for this was obviously they've got some no-till systems and different things in the South, but also just they've got some resistant weed issues that they're fighting. So it's really cool, and that's one of the major points of that project was that it is something that any farmer with a little bit of know-how and elbow grease could create on their own farm. That was really one of the foundational parts of the project was that using parts that farmers could get a hold of and retrofit on their own and make the system work on their own farm.
What are the details of registration for CatCon?
Shelby, people can go online to carta-online.org to get registered. They can do it on there. That's the easiest way to do it. It is $75 just to attend this year, and to have a membership included, it's $125. And if students would like to attend, it is $25, and that includes your lunch and dinner and registration for the event.
John, Darren, Luke, I appreciate you all taking the time to join us today.
All right. Thank you, Shelby.
Shelby, thank you, and definitely looking forward to the conference here in a few weeks.
That was Board President of CARTA, Darren Hofmann, Vice President John West, and Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent in the River Valley District, Luke Byers. In today's show notes on agtoday.net, I will put the link if you'd like to find out more information or get registered. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. Vermicomposting involves raising worms in a contained area to harvest waste for fertilizing the garden. K-State instructor and horticulture extension specialist Cynthia Domenghini explains the benefits and steps involved in setting up a vermicomposting system. Cynthia, the worms that are involved with vermicomposting, I'm assuming these are not just your normal kind of worms. Do we need a specific type of worm?
Yeah, exactly. So the worms that you find out in your garden, traditionally, those are fantastic for the garden soil. But if you are going to do a vermicomposting project, you want to choose red wiggler worms. Those tend to be the most easy to find and the best option for a few reasons. One of those being that you're going to be vermicomposting in an enclosed container. And this type of worm prefers that environment. So they're not going to be trying to escape. Another thing is they have a really good appetite. So they will be chewing up all of the kitchen scraps that you put in their box, and they will be producing compost at a much quicker rate than some of the other varieties of worms.
And it's that waste then that helps benefit the soil?
Exactly. Yeah, there are a couple of products that come from vermicomposting. One of them being the castings, which is the worm feces. That is something that you can harvest after a couple months of raising your worms and just incorporate it into the garden soil. The other is worm tea, which Sounds disgusting. Don't drink it. But worm tea is the liquid that drains out the bottom of your worm composting bin. And you can gather that liquid and water your plants with it, and it provides some nutritional benefit to your plants that way.
You talked about a worm bin. What all is involved with getting this all set up?
You can actually purchase pre-made worm bins, and they have a nice look to them, and they can be very functional. But you can also make one yourself for very low cost, and it's actually quite easy to do by using a dark-colored plastic storage container, the kind that you might store holiday decorations in or any type of storage container. But you want it to be dark so that it will block out any light from getting to the worms. The size can vary, but the recommendation is that you would have about 1 square foot or cubic foot of space per pound of worms. In addition to the storage container, you will need 2 lids. One lid will sit securely on top of the container, and the other lid is what's going to sit beneath the container to catch that worm tea. Then what you're going to do with your storage container is drill holes that are about 1/8 to 1/4 inch in diameter. You'll put a few across the bottom of the container to allow that worm tea to drain out. And then you'll put some on the sides of the container in the top half, about every 4 inches or so apart to allow for ventilation, but to keep the worms from crawling out. Fill the bottom, about 2/3 of the container with what's going to be the bedding material. And that can be made up of a variety of materials. It could be shredded newspaper or brown corrugated cardboard. You can incorporate some fall leaves or straw. Using a variety of those materials is ideal, but you do want to add some water to the bedding so that it's moist. The dry conditions are not good for the worms, so keep those conditions moist. Then once your worms arrive, you'll bury them beneath that bedding with a small amount of kitchen scraps, and you are all set to start vermicomposting.
And then where are we going to store the bin?
The bin needs to be kept out of direct sunlight, and ideally the temperature would be between 60 and 80 degrees. So that's a bit of a range. It is a great project to keep tucked away in your home. I have a shelf that I actually keep them right next to my kitchen. And that's kind of nice because I can add kitchen scraps to the bin as I go. I don't forget about the worms because they're there in my kitchen.
That's Cynthia Domenghini, a K-State instructor and horticulture extension specialist with information on Vermicomposting. And there's more. Next week we'll focus on what to feed your worms and maintaining the worm bin. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.